Today we're talking about the ESFP personality type. What are the strengths and weaknesses of this type? What other types does the ESFP naturally get along with? What are the other personality types that are a bit different from the ESFP, which might lead to communication issues? And what is really important to ESFPs in life? What are their desires and what are the things that scare them and make them feel afraid? All about that in the next minutes. Please do not forget to like and subscribe, and let's dive in. Okay, so firstly, let's go a little bit into detail with respect to the letters that describe this personality type. But again, guys, as we discussed in the previous videos, the letters are not really the true way in which someone can understand any personality type. They just give us a very brief description of certain characteristics or tendencies that the types might have. So first of all, we have E, which stands for extroverted. This means that the ESFP is more likely to draw their energy from the outside world, interacting with people, with tasks, with situations, and so on. Then we have S, which stands for sensing, which is the characteristic, let's say, that enables the ESFPs to prefer processing information by focusing on concrete things rather than abstract ideas and theories. Then we have F, which stands for feeling. This means that the ESFP is more likely to be interested or to prioritize feelings and values and subjective aspects when making a decision. And lastly, we have P, which stands for perceiving. Perceiving means that the ESFP is more likely to prefer living in a flexible, spontaneous environment. Again, this doesn't mean that they are necessarily disorganized. It's just that for their mental ease and for their relaxation, it's better for them to know that there is a lot of flexibility and spontaneity in a system or in a structure in which they work in, operate in, and so on. Okay, so how about cognitive functions? Well, the dominant function of the ESFP personality is extraverted sensing. Remember from the previous video where we discussed ISTP, extraverted sensing is all about taking action. It's all about living in the moment. It's probably the function that is best at making quick decisions, trying things out rather than planning ahead, being involved in a situation rather than thinking about it, and actually living in the moment right there, right now. This is a strength of the ESTP personality in the sense that it enables them to act, to try things out, to go there out in the open and explore the world. They're also quite good at making quick decisions, risking, having quick reflexes as well, and this tends to make them quite prone to being interested in things that somehow stimulate their senses. So it could be aesthetical things, it could be art, it could be sports, anything that enables their senses to interact with the external world. However, if overused, this function can also lead to way too risky behavior, uncalculated risks, which might cause them to get into trouble, and sometimes not being able to really analyze and process things in a deep way because they're so focused externally. The auxiliary function, which is probably the healthiest function of the ESFP personality, is introverted feeling. This means that when making decisions, the ESFP will be quite interested in understanding their inner world. Just like the ENFP personality, for example, ESFPs are really attuned with their feelings, with their values, with their moral code, and they take these things a lot into account when making a decision about what is really important, because they understand what is important to themselves better than anything else. So this means that they're quite sensitive people that tend to be interested in the inner worlds that they have inside of them, and also quite curious about the deep underlying values of other people, and this can make them quite likable, charismatic, and deeply emotional individuals. The tertiary function of the ESFP personality is extroverted thinking. So again, considering that we have introverted feeling, which is basically the function that speaks about values, morals, feelings that one has, extroverted thinking is basically the function that enables the ESFP to focus on the external world and to understand what works for the external world. So in a sense, they're good at understanding their own emotions and values, but when it comes to the outside world, they're better off making decisions while using logical and a more analytical, objective approach. And usually, ESFPs are quite good at balancing these two things out. And their decision-making process tends to be a good mixture of subjective and objective, of self and others. This means that sometimes an ESFP might come across as a thinker, especially those who have developed extroverted thinking a lot, but it is not necessarily the case. They can be quite logical and analytical, but at the same time they're deeply interested in the emotional aspect of things, in the deep interconnections of their values and morality system. And lastly, the inferior function of the ESFP personality is introverted intuition. Remember, we have discussed this function with INFJ, ENTJ, ISTP. Introverted intuition is all about digging deep and gathering and organizing the conceptual world. It's focused a lot on anticipating the future, understanding things in a very deep way, and kind of projecting things with respect to what will happen next. This is not necessarily a strength of the ESFP, even though sometimes they might be really enjoying using this function because they're fascinating with the interconnections that it allows them to see. However, they might struggle with it because they're so focused on the extroverted sensing. Their challenge will be to integrate introverted intuition together with extroverted sensing in such a way that using both of them at the same time, or not at the same time, but in a more balanced way, will help them to perceive the world in a more balanced way. So they're quite balanced in their decision-making process because they tend to balance out feeling and thinking better. However, when it comes to analyzing and understanding things, they might be a little bit too prone to jumping into action and not thinking too much before doing that. And again, this is useful in some situations, but in other situations it can cause them to take unnecessary risks, to react a little bit too impulsively, which they will later on probably regret. And this is where introverted intuition can come into play to help them anticipate what will happen next, analyze things, and maybe only after planning a little bit, take action and take that calculated risk. So someone asked me, what are the fears of the ESFP personality? Well, we should look at the inferior function, which is introverted intuition. And in the case of the ESFP, it might be difficult for them to actually focus on planning ahead and looking into the future. And they might fear that in a way they're losing control of their capacity to act, their capacity to move things forward, which is really important to them. Therefore, they might be struggling and they might have difficulty actually jumping into a specific context if they focus too much on their introverted intuition. Also, they might be afraid of not making decisions based on things that are really important to them and not being allowed to make decisions based on their morality system or their values. Okay, what about compatibilities? What are the other types that the ESFP get along naturally with? Well, the theory, the stereotypical theory, says that ESFPs get along best with other types that use sensing as a dominant function. So this would be ESTP, ISFJ, and ISTJ. However, if you remember from my previous video, I've always been describing, let's say, these groups of personality types where they share the same 4 cognitive functions, and this enables them to really grow together and understand each other on a deeper level. And again, in the case of ESFP, these 3 other personality types are ISFP, ENTJ, and INTJ. These are all types that the ESFP share cognitive functions with. This would mean extroverted sensing and introverted intuition, extroverted thinking and introverted feeling. Okay, and when it comes to types that the ESFP might have difficulty relating to, I would say that these are ENTP and INTP. Why? Because they're really polar opposites of this type, both in terms of cognitive functions and in the sense that they prefer intuition and thinking over sensing and feeling. So thank you guys, thank you a lot for watching. Please like and subscribe, and see you next week with another video. And in the meantime, you can ask me anything else you would like to know about the ESFP.